Welcome back to Directly Current, the EV Politics podcast. I'm your host, Max Patton. On this episode, we're speaking with the CEO and co-founder of Harbinger Motors, John Harris. Harbinger Motors is occupying a really cool niche in the EV sector. They're not producing EVs for consumers, they're producing EVs for fleets, and specifically an area that hasn't been electrified yet, which is medium-duty trucks. Think something like a UPS box truck, which sits in between a smaller delivery van like GM and Rivian have made, and on the other end, an 18-wheel semi-truck. Medium duty is basically, well, as the name implies, in the middle, and it's an immensely relevant area to electrify because, as you might imagine, it's much, much cheaper to run these vehicles once you buy them. And specifically, Harbinger, in addition to building these vehicles in the US, and of course, there's the other benefits of electrification that come alongside that, like cleaner air and quieter communities, as these trucks do spend lots of their time in the suburbs. Harbinger, in addition to building these vehicles in the US, wants to guarantee to its customers that they're going to ensure they get savings from the current law on the books, the Inflation Reduction Act, which has a commercial credit of $12,000 for these kinds of vehicles. Harbinger is going to guarantee that by basically filling that in for their customers in case they don't get it from the government, which you can understand why is pretty nice in an otherwise uncertain environment. John and I also discussed the very relevant topic of tariffs, which might change by the time you listen to this, but as of now still apply to the auto industry, even though they've been broadly exempted for many, many other things like electronic devices. The strategy that Harbinger Motors is employing with their made in the US battery packs and motors is fascinating. Of course, they do have to source materials internationally, but because of the limited reliance they have on intermediary suppliers and just relying on raw materials, there's actually a lot more margin for them to work around. And it's producing some really interesting advantages for their business in a time that's honestly really rough for many other auto companies. Now, Harbinger is going to release these trucks as a chassis, essentially, that others can build on top of. They even have worked with others to make an RV product. So there's all kinds of applications for this technology, and it's rolling out imminently. Super exciting. So let's welcome on John Harris to Directly Current. Okay, co-founder and CEO of Harbinger Motors, John Harris, welcome on to Directly Current. Thanks so much for joining us.
You too. Thanks for having me.
Of course. So first off, can you give people just a little bit of a primer on what exactly your vehicles do? Because just for some upfront context here, you produce like the medium duty vehicles. That's a little bit bigger than maybe like some of the neighborhood delivery vans people might be used to, but maybe not quite a semi truck. Like where exactly does that slot in?
Yeah, so we make, as you said, medium-duty vehicles. Today we're building vehicles in classes 4 through 6. What that means is our vehicles have gross vehicle weight ratings of between 16 and 26,000 pounds. For some comparison points, if you've got an F-150 that probably has a GVWR of about 7,000 pounds. If you've got a Sprinter, e-Sprinter, Transit, Rivian van, Bright Drop, etc., 10,000 pounds. So it's still light duty.
Yep.
And then above the Harbinger products, you've got heavy-duty vehicles in class 7 and 8 with GVWRs of 33 or 80,000 pounds.
Gotcha. And what makes this market segment compelling? Is it just the fact that no one else seems to be delivering something in this niche, or like what exactly lets Harbinger bring a unique product into here?
So I think everything about this segment makes it compelling, but I guess some more useful answers. The vehicles are just perfectly suited to electrification. It's a big one. We think electrification really only works when it can be done economically. And when I say economically, I'm talking about economically basically within the first year of purchase, ideally at the point of purchase.
Wow.
People who expect that you can buy an EV and make up for fuel savings over 7 or 8 years, I don't see it. Not in commercial, with commercial customers in particular. So the way medium duty vehicles are used, they're so well suited to electrification, it helps us make them more cost effectively. And then the other piece is, like you said, no one's really doing this. It helps when you're competing against an open field. Mm-hmm. And the way in which no one is doing it is also helpful. Medium duty vehicles are all built as incomplete vehicles, a chassis plus a body. So we're doing something that's limited in scope. We're building chassis and we're competing against almost no one.
Yeah, and why do you think that is? Because there is the Rivian RDV you mentioned. Ford has the e-Transit. I think Daimler has some products in this space, or in the light duty space, I should say, but no one's really gone up a class. Is it a matter of like they're scared to put in that large battery packs, make those investments, or what exactly is it about these platforms that leaves it open to you guys?
The issue is really the intersection of product requirements and investment to build new technology at a large company. So if you think about all those products you mentioned, right? The Rivian delivery van, the e-Sprinter, the e-Transit, the BrightDrop van, what those really are is a bunch of class 1 pickup truck technology that's been repurposed. And that makes sense, right? The auto market in the US is basically like pickups and other. So if you're sitting down at Ford and you're thinking, hey, I'm going to spend $10 billion on making something new, what should it be? Obviously, the answer is a pickup. Now you've got $10 billion worth of technology. So obvious question number 2 is, what can I do with all my pickup truck technology? And you can take all of that stuff that you developed around that 7,000 pound GVWR and reuse it for a 10,000 pound GVWR. So the reason you see so many great products in that light duty unibody van space is because you're getting to repurpose that massive investment in pickup truck technology.
The other thing I wonder is you've seen like e-Sprinter, e-Transit, all those vehicles in some way are, RDV might be a little bit different, but those two vehicles I mentioned are very much carryover of combustion platforms in some way with some clever engineering around that. But what is compared to what people might be used to in like a passenger car or even a passenger truck, like a, let's say, Silverado EV, like purpose built, whatever pickup truck, right? For customers, much less range. Obviously, the different duty cycle maybe doesn't need that range, but they're not exactly like technology leaders. They're just offering what's good enough for those customers. You guys have some serious high voltage platforms, batteries, charging going on in your chassis. I imagine that's much more expensive to develop. What are the costs and the benefits of going with this approach of getting those higher class vehicles, the higher gross weight ratings, meeting those specifications? Like, that sounds difficult to me. What are some of the big challenges there?
I don't know that it's more difficult. It's just a different set of requirements. It takes more materials. So there's an absolute price minimum where we say, hey, a vehicle in this weight class needs to produce X torque to go up a hill. We're going to always need more copper to do that than a vehicle that weighs half. But that's not the thing that really drives the difficulty. It's around the customer expectations for durability. If you look at those light duty vehicles, the thing that really helps big OEMs get away with reusing that pickup truck technology is that the expectations for the durability of a pickup are a lot higher than the expectations of durability for a light duty van. So you can think about pushing this technology uphill. And as you go farther uphill into heavier GVWs, the durability naturally goes down because you're beating on it harder. And in light duty vans, that's okay. If you buy a pickup, you expect it to last 10 years. Like, you may not expect to own it 10 years, but part of your purchasing decision is probably an assumption that some residual value exists. And if the vehicle is basically scrap in 5 years, like, the residual is zero. So you're going to be probably less excited to buy that.
Yeah.
If you look at operators of light duty vehicles, that is not really true. Amazon, for example, will rotate all the light duty vehicles out after 3 years. And that's a really short timeline on which to basically dispose of a vehicle. Some of the older fleet operators will keep things like Sprinters until they scrap them, but that's typically around 5 or 6 years. So that's because of the fact that it's lighter duty technology being used harder in a commercial setting. So, but those lower customer expectations actually make it, I'm not going to say easy, but it's achievable to reuse that technology. In Harbinger's weight class, the customers expect the vehicles to last for 20 years. Some of them expect longer than that, but 20 is a pretty consistent target. And so we had to go out and say, what kind of architecture do we want to use in our suspension to get to a 20-year life? What kind of insulation system do we want to use in our motor high voltage conductors to get to a 20-year life? So is it harder? Yes, but more importantly, it's just about having requirements and executing on them. Sometimes they add a little bit of cost. Like in our motor, for example, we use an all-peak insulation system. So we use peak slot paper liner and peak insulation on our copper. And that's more expensive than the enamel or lacquer insulation that they'd use in a Model 3. But as long as from day one, it's just a question of paying that extra price to hit the requirement.
That makes sense. It's that higher bill of materials, I guess, marginally in some
Correct.
areas, but much higher lifespan. The big glaring question, I know there's been studies proving that like lots of the lithium ion cells and especially the LFP cells can be very durable, but still in the public consciousness, people are worried about battery longevity. So I have to ask, given that may be one of the most expensive components in your chassis, is in your trucks, how do you approach managing that? Maybe even giving it a warranty. What does that look like for a customer who takes one of your chassis and builds a vehicle with it?
So the easiest answer right off the bat is we have a 10-year unlimited mileage warranty on the battery system. And for most customers, that's the answer. They're like, oh, wow, it must be good if you're willing to warranty it. Because I think usually you look at a warranty on something today, for like a car, and I think everyone has figured out that the manufacturer is not going to take any risk on that warranty. So whatever they tell you the warranty is, the real durability is better than that. You're right. The public has a lot of concern about battery life. I think that we're starting to see that shift because of how many high mileage vehicles are now on the road from Tesla. After the Model S came out, for years, people were like, oh, obviously we're going to have to replace all the batteries in 5 years. Just kidding. 6, just kidding. 7, 8, 9. Now we're, 12 years in to a real deployment of Model S's. Most of those vehicles still have the original batteries. So the data is starting to show the degradation is not that steep. The other piece is that there's a curve that makes it more obvious. When people fielded Model S's originally, they look at the battery capacity, what we would call the state of health, and the curve is going like way downhill, right? And people are like, here's the slope. I'm going to extrapolate that. And it says I'm going to have no battery life in 5 years. And you can look at that and be like, wow, I guess we're going to have to replace all the batteries in 5 years. That's a reasonable conclusion. What we learned, though, is that the state of health in a battery is going to come down fairly quickly from basically 90 to 92%, give or take. And then it flattens out and it follows this asymptote out. And it takes a long time to get to 80%.
Yep.
So people were drawing conclusions that were reasonable when they were only seeing the first year of data. But now that we see that sort of hockey stick laying on its side curve over and over again on deployed vehicles, it's gotten clearer. That's what we can expect.
Yeah, I think it's been really nice to see in the passenger car space. I know you brought up like Model S as an example. I think the interesting thing, we'll provide a visual aid for listeners, they get a link to your site and everything. But for people just to imagine what these vehicles look like, you imagine your big UPS box truck, right? You are like, this is not a Lucid Air. It's not a Model S. You're not producing some kind of aerodynamically optimized highway muncher. These are slotting into a very specific use case. For people who aren't familiar, like how many miles a day do these vehicles charge? Do you expect that customers are going to DC fast charge them? Are they going to AC charge them overnight? What does that look like?
So it's typically about 60 miles a day. That's based on US DOT data for medium duty vehicles. I think most of our customers are actually doing less than that, but the vast majority of these vehicles in medium duty, they're doing well under 90 miles a day. That still adds up to a lot of miles because these are vehicles that are going to do, again, let's say 60 miles a day, but they're going to do it 6 days a week, 52 weeks a year for 20 years.
And fully loaded.
Not fully loaded, but they're going to be half loaded. Like they're probably, in some use cases, you start full and go to empty throughout the day. And some use cases, there's like a different shaped curve, but they're carrying a lot of cargo along the way. A big part of that battery life, though, is how they're charged. So you asked about DC fast charging. Harbinger vehicles can be fast charged in 1 hour, but it's very rare for a customer to want to do.
Yeah.
These are vehicles that are overwhelmingly used for one shift. FedEx uses the vehicles for one shift, not because the vehicles won't do more than that, but because most of us don't want to get a FedEx package at 3 a.m.
Yeah.
Our bakery customers use the vehicle for one shift because most restaurants don't really want to get a bakery delivery at 6 p.m. It's nothing about the vehicles specifically, and it's generally not even consistent across the class. Because most medium-duty vehicles are used to deliver something, someone's got to receive that something on the other end, and they usually want to do it in a certain time frame. So that means that these vehicles are going to slow charge over 10 to 12 hours in the same place every night.
Gotcha. Yeah, which makes sense, right? You're seeing some of the heavy duty, the semi vehicles are doing not just the DC charging we're used to, but MCS, right? Megawatt charging and all of this different deployed infrastructure. I imagine lots of these Harbinger vehicles aren't going to see a lot of their life on the highway. It's going to be probably in more urban, suburban environments with cargo.
or they're going to be on the highway, but just a little bit each day. Like
Yeah.
we model according to what we call the e-commerce delivery cycle, where it basically comes out of a depot. It does 20 miles on the highway to get into a delivery area. It does 20 miles of neighborhood deliveries, and then it gets back on the highway to drive back to the depot.
Yeah. So when you're making the pitch to customers to say, hey, adopt these, you're going to have a lower cost once you factor in potentially incentives that might be local or federal and the lower cost to run. If they don't have the, let's say, a 200 amp circuit or something specific to have lots of higher power level 2 AC charging for these trucks overnight, do you see that being a challenge, or is that something that these operators are sophisticated enough? If you're FedEx, you can just do that, or do you think it's a challenge still?
I think it's a challenge, but it's less of a challenge early on. There's this sort of like absolutism that people take where they're like, we're going to electrify this delivery fleet. We're obviously going to electrify every single vehicle in this fleet like the same day. And we're going to have to install all the chargers at the same moment. And every charger is going to have to be installed before we buy any electric vehicles. And you laugh, but like people tell me this.
Yeah.
And they're like, hey, we got to solve this problem. Otherwise, can't buy anything. The reality is much more nuanced than that, right? People want to buy, if you have 100 vehicles at a depot, you're probably replacing 8 to 10% of them a year. Well, you're presumably not going to throw all the vehicles away and buy EVs. Like I guess that would be cool for us, but that seems wasteful and the sort of thing we'd want to encourage.
Yeah.
If you're going to buy 5 and you're going to run them for 6 months and say, oh, look, the vehicles are great. And now we'll buy 10. Next year we'll buy 10. And the next year we'll buy 10. So each time it's, hey, do you need more chargers? Yeah, but you don't need them all at the same moment. And that gives you the ability to roll the infrastructure in waves. Our vehicles typically are charging off of a NEMA 1450 outlet. It's the same outlet that you plug your dryer into. So most fleet locations have enough power to add, I would say 5 to 10 of those without it being very difficult. And that's going to cover everyone's first deployment. If you want 50, then yeah, we're going to be out there like digging up the parking lot, running in power. But there aren't a lot of people who want to buy 50 vehicles on a whim.
Most companies probably will want to trial balloon this in some way, or like you said, just naturally replace the aging vehicles, not suddenly declare, oh, we're going zero carbon, we replaced all our vehicles and let's cash for clunkers the rest. That doesn't make sense for a variety of reasons. In terms of the manufacturer here, I think that's one of the most interesting stories with you guys is you're building the vehicles here in the US of A. I assume you're assembling the battery packs. I know you have your own motor technology as well. So when it comes to that, it's been highly catalyzed by the Inflation Reduction Act that we've seen and a bunch of other just suppliers taking this whole market more seriously. But I imagine that's still also challenging as well. So what is it like getting this kind of infrastructure on the ground for you guys to build these things in North America?
Yeah, so I would say there's things that have been made easier by the IRA, but I wouldn't think of like our strategy around vertical integration being catalyzed by that. I think of the IRA as being particularly valuable to help customers pay more attention and draw more light to the segment. And it's also helped make certain large fixed cost investments. So there's more cell production being put up in the US now, which is great.
Yeah.
For us, building this capacity, we focused really on sourcing simple parts, raw materials, to try to get commodity pricing. So those are areas where we still have a lot of room to improve in the US. Like we can't get large format, high pressure die castings in the US. For any amount of money. It's just not available to us here. So we've gone out and basically tried to be a commodity purchaser of cells, aluminum, steel. We buy bulk copper now and wind the motors here. But a lot of that's really been around supply chain optimization more than anything else.
Yep.
If you're buying copper, like everyone's buying copper at the same price. There's not big spreads on that. Everyone can look at the commodities index and say, it's copper, it's worth this much money. And we all know we can all have open data that way. If you're buying an entire electric motor, there's no open data, right? I think it's worth this, you think it's worth that. It's a complex item, there's engineering costs and overhead and validation and tooling. So the extent of vertical integration we do has really been around circumventing margin capture by the very lengthy automotive supply chain that exists below most OEMs.
Which is interesting because you would think GM and Daimler and Ford would do that right away. And they're getting there, but it seems like they're still using lots of off-the-shelf stuff just based off their products in the market right now in that light-duty space. And you guys have much more of this vertically integrated approach. What made you decide to do that? Because that comes with its own, right, extra investment, more talent that you need for that. What made that seem like the clear path?
If you don't do it in-house, there's no path to positive margins. It's as simple as that. And that was obvious to us 4 years ago. It's become obvious to a lot more people today.
Yeah.
But if you're going to go and buy the drive system as a whole from Bosch, you're never going to make money on that vehicle.
Yeah.
Because you're just giving all the margin to these other companies that have their own giant overhead and bureaucracy and their own sort of justifiable need to make a profit. So like when you buy an off-the-shelf drivetrain system, like you're paying that company you buy it from and their margin, you're paying their own lengthy supply chain, and each of those companies you're paying their margin. So if you look at that like off-the-shelf motor, you're paying margin on that copper probably 4 times on the margin, right? Stacking exponentially throughout. Like we're paying margin on the copper once, and then we're buying the lamination stacks from someone else, and we're getting the connectors for someone else. So like we just have to decouple all of that and flatten it out.
Yeah. Does that in some way also give you guys more resiliency? Because we are in the midst of an ongoing trade war right now, and that's obviously it affects a lot of people in the industry. I'm sure it affects you guys too, even just buying commodities. But does it make it somewhat more resilient or easy for you to adapt? Or I'm sure there's challenges with that too. What does it look like right now in this trade environment with tariffs on some things, tariffs on some other things that's still developing day by day? But what does that picture look like?
It definitely makes us a lot more resilient. The idea for me with resiliency is you have to buy something that's fungible. And if I'm buying like a whole Ford engine, for example, and Ford decides they don't want to sell those to me, could happen for any number of reasons. I can't just unplug it and plug in a GM engine. It's too complicated. If I'm buying aluminum billet or aluminum ingots, casting engines, and my aluminum ingot producer goes bankrupt, I'm just going to get some other aluminum ingots. So that replaceability piece to me is the most important part for resiliency. It means as tariffs go up in one place, down in another, we can move those commodity sources around.
Yep.
And of course, the most resilient way to do that is to keep as much of it can here in the US, but also under our control. So as tariff prices spiked over the last, is it like 5 years or no, it's only 3 weeks? Our battery pack prices have been essentially unchanged. But the packs people are importing from China got 145% more expensive last week.
Do you think at some point, though, like whoever's making your cells is going to say, okay, these are more expensive now? Do you see that coming and some kind of pricing? I'm sure you're going to have to adjust your prices at some point to react to this, right?
Absolutely. There's still price increases coming for everyone. The difference is our price going to go up 3% or 30%? Our cells are going to get a little bit more expensive. There are import tariffs that have gone up on everything in the US across the board that's coming in. So you're right, they're going to get more expensive, but those tariffs are on a percentage basis. So the other piece to consider is they're getting more expensive from what base?
Yeah.
If I was buying cells at $200 a kilowatt hour and they got 5% more expensive versus buying battery packs at $400 a kilowatt hour and they get 100% more expensive, like you can visualize how that graph diverges really quick. So we've got to buy stuff that's cheaper so the product is the right price.
Yep.
But then that cheaper stuff is also more insulated from those tariffs.
Yeah. The fact that you guys don't have to deal with those compound margins and all those other things that would eat away your profit, does that make it easier to do? Like last month, you had this press release about doing an IRA guarantee, right, for buyers. If they're unsure if they're going to get the 45W credit, I guess it gives them some more peace of mind that they're going to get. In that case, it's what, 12 grand discount on the purchase of these trucks, which is like over 10% of the price in some cases of these things. That's a huge deal. So is that part of what enables you to do that? Is it also just a bet on the future? What's enabling you guys to offer that discount?
No, the lower prices are definitely what enables us to offer that. If we were any other company in this segment, the price spread between our product and the diesel truck would be the full $40,000 in the IRA. And we can guarantee that $12,000 to $14,000. We can't guarantee $40,000 a truck. But again, since our trucks aren't $40,000 more expensive, we don't have to. If we had not vertically integrated to this extent, the general confusion around the IRA would be much more challenging to manage.
Yeah, that's super exciting. I know people will probably start seeing these in some form at some point. In terms of what form they're going to take, I know you guys have this partnership too with Thor and Winnebago for making RVs as well. That's a plug-in hybrid platform. What kind of form will people see these on the road? I'm assuming they're not going to be branded with your thing. Other people can put their fascia on it, but what are people going to see these in their neighborhood or their city? I guess, how are you deploying them?
So they probably won't even know it's a Harbinger truck because we only build the chassis. We don't build the body. Once you put our chassis under an existing body, pretty invisible. The difference is going to be that you're not going to hear it drive by. It's going to be quieter. There's going to be no pollution and the general knock-on effects that come with a combustion engine. So you'll keep a look at the hubcaps. Maybe you'll see some Harbinger logos, but in general, I think they'll just show up silently in the neighborhoods without a lot of fanfare.
Yeah, that's awesome. I'm sure the EV nerds among us will be definitely looking for the hubcaps, looking for the CCS or the whatever, the J1772 inlet. I'm sure people will find ways to identify them. Any other last thoughts before we leave on basically producing in America, coming to deploy your vehicles in all of these use cases, things you're looking forward to, things you're maybe scared of?
I think that it's really important in electrification that we find the places where we can deliver slam dunks to customers. That's something that I think people haven't understood just how important that is. When we go and tell a customer, we, in this case, meaning like society, that like you have to use 100% EVs or you're a bad person, we're not doing anyone any favors because there's just going to be use cases where it doesn't work. We need to focus on picking the low-hanging fruit, getting people to cost savings, getting the emissions reductions, and then moving that ball forward every year. We've got to take a more nuanced approach to helping people adopt the vehicles and a less hysterical approach.
Yeah. So in that sense of where you guys are in Los Angeles, makes sense to deploy. Here where I'm in Denver probably does as well. Maybe Cheyenne, Wyoming, North Dakota, some places.
Yeah, that's going to be tougher. If you're doing 150-mile delivery routes, you should look at the product we're announcing later this month, which might be exciting for that. But in general, that is a very tough use case for an EV.
Yeah, for sure. Thank you so much for your time, John, and everyone should check out Harbinger Motors, especially if you're potentially interested in electrifying some of your fleet. Super exciting work you guys are doing. Love it.
Thanks. Great to be on. Thanks, Max.
That's all for this episode of Directly Current. We'll be back in 2 weeks with another very exciting guest to discuss U.S. manufacturing, American jobs, and electric vehicles. Thanks so much to John for his time. We're going to continue to discuss the effect of tariffs and, of course, ongoing federal policy on the auto industry as it electrifies and transitions. It's very difficult times right now, and I feel for any of you who are listeners who are undergoing it, many of you I know who work in the auto industry, please do give us feedback. We have an email in the show description. Whether you have thoughts or comments, very curious to hear those. And of course, you can check out all of the work we're doing at the American EV Jobs Alliance by going to evpolitics.org. That link is also in the description. Thank you so much for listening. Of course, feel free to subscribe to this in your podcast app of choice so you get it when we release an episode every 2 weeks. And I'll see you next time. Bye.